everybody. Welcome back. I know it's been a really long time since I've gotten the opportunity to speak with you, but we're back, and we'll try to get back to normal as best we can. Um, I'll send a message in Schoology letting everybody know that the videos will be available again on YouTube. And so, without further ado, let's pick up where we left off. We had been discussing the turbulent 1830s and 40s with the elections of President Jackson and Martin Van Buren and the battles that they had over Indian rights and the National Bank, and kind of the debate between the Whig Party, which emerges to rival Andrew Jackson, and people like Henry Clay who favor the American system. And basically the entire Whig Party was formed against Andrew Jackson. So today we're going to look at some societal changes that were going on within the United States in the 1840s. And so without further ado, let's get going. All right, so let's see. Okay, so Irish. Ireland was already having a great amount of difficulties from the heavy hand of the British, who have had a heavy influence on the lands of Ireland for thousands of years, really. But in the mid 1840s, a terrible rot attacked the potato crop, on which people of Ireland became dangerously dependent. And about a quarter of them were swept away with hunger and disease. I have an announcement. Hang on.
Good morning, everyone. Sorry for the interruption. If you have not filled out the long COVID form that's in the office, if you could do so, please do it now. Do not forget to fill out your COVID form online. The forms are up front and the thermometer is up front. Thank you.
Good to know. All right. But yeah, about 25% of the people living in Ireland, either were diseased or literally starving to death. Throughout much of Ireland, dead bodies could be found by roadsides, just people who collapsed of starvation, a lot of them with grass still in their mouths, where they were trying to eat grass to survive. And all told, the Irish potato famine killed about 2 million people in Ireland. So, as you might imagine, a lot of these destitute people began to flee this famine, the land of famine, for the land of plenty, the United States of America, and what we now refer to as the Black 40s. And Ireland's great export became their people, and Irish took their place beside people like Africans and Jews, who became dispersed people. But a lot of these people were very, very, very poor, and because they were too poor to move once they got here. And they weren't able to buy any land, livestock, equipment. And so essentially they just swarmed into the larger seaboard cities. Most noteworthy were places like New York and Boston, which rapidly, New York actually was the largest Irish city in the world, even more than Dublin or Belfast. There were more Irish people living in New York than there were in any city in Ireland. So that's kind of crazy. So these luckless Irish immigrants, they were not treated very well, to say the least. They were forced to live in squalor. They were crammed into already vile slums. They were scorned by people who saw themselves as proper Bostonians or proper New Yorkers. And they were Catholic, and these Catholics were seen as a social menace. They were barely literate. Females were called biddies, B-I-D-D-I-E-S, biddies, mainly because Bridget was a pretty popular Irish name. They took jobs as kitchen maids, and then Paddies, P-A-D-D-I-S, Patricks, were pushed into pick and shovel drudgery and working on canals and railroads. And they had a very difficult go of it. Mainly because of the competition that they created for jobs. Now, the Irish were hated by the native people. The native, when I say natives, I mean white Protestant people, waspy people, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. And signs began to emerge saying things like Nina, no Irish need apply. It was commonly posted at factory gates. Um, you know, they they remain so it forced Irish to remain in low skill occupations. But gradually, just like many groups in America, they were able to improve their place in society, especially once millions and millions of Irish people began immigrating into the United States over a course of several decades, and then natural rate of population growth within Irish communities. Politics quickly attracted these Irish newcomers, and soon they were beginning to gain control of powerful political city machines. Most notably would be like New York's Tammany Hall. Before long, these Irishmen dominated police departments, and in many big cities where they were once carted off in paddy wagons, now they're driving them. So American politicians made haste to try to cash in on Irish votes, especially in the politically potent state of New York. But all in all, as Irish Americans increased in number, nearly 2 million people arrived in a 30-year period between 1830 and 1860. So it's a very, very significant number of Irish immigrants coming to the United States. And they were not the only group to come in mass numbers. There was also an influx of German refugees between 1830 and 1860, roughly the same time. Less spectacular than the numbers that were coming from Ireland, but the bulk of them were uprooted farmers who had been displaced by crop failures and other hardships. But a lot of them were liberal political refugees who were saddened by the collapse of democratic revolutions in Germany which occurred in 1848. But they decided to leave their the autocratic fatherland of Germany and flee to America, which was the brightest glimmer of hope for democracy in the world at that time. And these people that came from Germany, Germany's loss and America's gain. These zealous German liberals, and they hated slavery, they hated public corruption, and they really contributed richly to the elevation of American political life. Now, unlike a lot of the Irish, the Germans had a modest amount of material wealth. And as a result of that, they were able to push inward into the United States, into places like the Midwest, most notably, as you can see by this map, Wisconsin, where they settled and established model farms. And like the Irish, they became an influential body of voters. But the Germans were less potent politically because their strength was more widely scattered throughout the Midwest region, whereas the Irish were pretty well contained to the eastern seaboard and larger cities. So the hands of Germans, when it came to shaping American life, we get a lot of things that were really imported from Germany, from these German people, like the Conestoga wagon, certain type of rifle, but the Kentucky rifle, Christmas trees. They were, people didn't really put up Christmas trees in the United States until the Germans made it a popular thing, as it was a cultural item that they brought with them. Many of these people were educated, and so they were obviously they're going to put a heavy emphasis on their children being educated, and so they created schools for their youngest children called kindergartens. It's a German word. It means child's garden, where they would teach things like art, music, and then they would grow up and kind of pass this importance and value of education onto their children. So, they were often dubbed incorrectly as Dutchmen because they're not from Holland, they're from Germany, but they'd say they're from the Deutschland. That's how you say Germany in German, Deutschland, or Deutsch. And so people would call them the Dutch. So you see that like Pennsylvania Dutch, Germans in Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania Dutch, but they're not Dutch, they're German. So once again, the Germans were also not really welcomed because of their own cultural taboos that they bring with them. They would drink beer, especially on their day of rest on the Sabbath. So, which this is going to spur things like, temperance movement to reduce the consumption of alcohol and hatred of foreigners. As the Irish were also no stranger to whiskey. Okay, so and that's what leads to some changes that occur in American politics as a result of this mass influx of immigration from Ireland and Germany. You're going to see some big time prejudices amongst people who are already in the United States. They refer to themselves as Native Americans or nativists. We're not talking like Indians, not Native. They would refer to themselves. This is just white Protestant people. Okay, so they were afraid of these foreign people coming to the United States because they would eventually feel like they would outbreed, outvote, and overwhelm them. So they thought that not only these newcomers were taking jobs from native, in quotation mark, Americans, but the bulk of these people were Roman Catholic, and they were fearful of the Catholic Church, as it's kind of ridiculous. The Catholic Church was still widely regarded by many old line Americans as a foreign church that took orders from the Pope, and so therefore they're like a monarchy, and so they're afraid that these people are going to try to overthrow American government in exchange for a king. So it was just silly. These people wanted to have a voice. They came to America for freedom, especially the Germans. They wanted political freedom. So these people put their Catholicity to work, seeking to protect their children from Protestant indoctrination. In public schools, they began to construct an entirely separate Catholic educational system, which was an extremely enormous undertaking, especially for poor immigrants. But they had a very strong commitment, and with the enormous amount of Irish and German immigrants in the 1840s and 50s, the Catholics became a very powerful religious group. Just to give you some numbers, like in 1840, kind of right toward the beginning of all the immigration, the Catholic Church was the fifth largest denomination in America. By 1850, they were first, and they're still first. The Catholic Church is the largest denomination in the United States to this day. So just to give you, it all began as a result of the potato famine in Ireland and the political revolutions of Germany in the 1840s, both of which. So political parties begin to emerge amongst native people to try to stave off the alien riffraff of these Catholic immigrants. And so the political party that emerges is referred to as the American Party. They're also more commonly referred to as the Know Nothings, the Know Nothing Party. They get their name out of a sense of secretiveness, because it was a secretive party. A lot of Masons were members of it. The Masons were and kind of still are an anti-Catholic organization. So the purpose, the platform of the Know Nothing Party was that they wanted to create stricter naturalization laws, so make it more difficult to immigrate to the United States, and they wanted to deport like Irish people and German people that were here and were impoverished, paupers, poor people. So, as obviously you're going to see it's going to be heated tensions when people begin to be deported, when people are denied access to the United States, and the people really singling out people because of their religion, which is obviously not fair at all. So you're going to see some violence begin to occur as convents, like a convent in 1834 in Boston was burned. A convent is just a house where nuns live. Um, a few scattered attacks fell upon Catholic schools. Several Catholic churches were burned. Um, these immigrants did not necessarily just take it. They definitely fought back. So, in one case in Philadelphia, there was 50 days of basically battlefield fighting in the streets between Catholics and Protestants. So the immigrants were definitely, undeniably making America a very pluralistic society. It is, and it was, and is to this day one of the most ethnically and racially varied in the history of the world. It takes a long time for people to come around to welcoming the immigrants, and even to this day, there's still a faction within the United States that are kind of following this. They're nativists, and they're fearful of immigration, fearful of people of different religions and skin colors and language speaking. So this is it's not a new thing. So you can see it right here with the immigration of the Irish and the Germans. Okay, so moving along. Right. Now this is also a societal thing, but it's more has to do with mechanization. Okay. Great Britain was the world's workshop. Like, it was where the Industrial Revolution began. It had existed there in full swing since the 1700s. Okay. But America was very slow in becoming an industrial giant. For one thing, some reasons for that is our land is very cheap in America, and so people were more willing to try to eke out a living as farmers, as opposed to going into cooping themselves up into a smelly factory. Also, labor was generally pretty scarce as a result of having such cheap land, because everyone could spread out. But when the immigrants began pouring into the United States, money for capital investment was plentiful, and raw materials were undeveloped, undiscovered, and we had an abundance of coal, and so the conditions became perfect. You had labor, you had the materials, you had the land, you had the capital, you had all the ingredients to really have an industrial explosion. And that's exactly what happened once the labor arrived in the form of cheap labor from Ireland and other areas. Samuel Slater is given the acclaim as being father of the factory system in America, but he's not an American. He's a British guy. He was a British mechanic, and when he was about 21 years old, he worked in a textile mill in England, and the British were very secretive of how their machines worked. But he was a mechanic, and he memorized the blueprints and the plans of a textile machine that made fabric. So when he disguised himself and escaped to America, where he met a Quaker capitalist by the name of Moses Brown in Rhode Island, and they laboriously began to reconstruct the apparatus with the aid of a blacksmith and a carpenter. And in 1791, they put into operation the first American machinery for spinning cotton thread from his own mind. So, kind of a brave guy doing such a thing. And in doing so, it really makes the spinning of cotton thread much easier. And so now you have this machine which allows you to spin thread very easily, but now there's not enough cotton fiber available to really utilize that machine to its full potential. So especially when you had to hand pick 1 pound of lint from 3 pounds of seed, that was a full day's work for anybody, and it was very costly and expensive. So another mechanical genius comes along, the Massachusetts-born Eli Whitney, and he makes his mark in the early 1790s with with a creation that we now refer to as the cotton gin. It's called the cotton gin. It's for slang. It's cotton engine is where the gin part comes from. And what this workable device does is it separates the seed from the cotton fiber. And this made it 50 times more effective to remove the seeds from the fiber than a person hand picking it. So this brings wild change to the United States. Eli Whitney's a Massachusetts man. He's not a slavery guy. But in the creation of the cotton gin, it really solidifies, in combination with Samuel Slater's spinning machine, it solidifies and ensures the continuation of slavery in the United States. Not because it's, slaves used to pick the cotton by hand, but now one slave can just use the cotton engine to remove the seeds. But because it's able to be done so fast, the amount of cotton needed to keep up with the demand for this quick made fabric became extremely high. So now that you have to grow much more cotton, and to grow the cotton is also very labor intensive, and it becomes extremely profitable. So the South was already tied to the throne of King Cotton, and even when human bondage was dying out a little bit, the insatiable demand for cotton riveted the chains to the limbs of these slaves for years to come as a result of these two machines. He's not a big slavery guy at all. He's an anti-slavery man, but he does more to solidify slavery than maybe anybody with his invention, unknowingly and unwittingly. Okay? All right, so I think that's a pretty good place to stop for today. As always, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact me. I'm doing office hours twice a day, 8:20 to 8:50 and 12:05 to 12:35. So if you need me, I'm available to you. And I hope that you guys had a restful break, and I'm looking forward to seeing you soon.